All right, and now I'm live. So I was on Facebook earlier, and there was a guy who I'm friends with. I don't know if he's a younger of creationist or if he's an older of creationist or what. He says he's not a younger of creationist, but he makes the same exact arguments they make, and not even just in regards to evolution, but he has the same apologetic when it comes to his interpretation of the flood. So one of his posts, he basically said he personally added up the dates in Genesis by himself, and he somehow mapped out or fixed a problem in Genesis with genealogies, and he said that the genealogies add up to about 7,300 years, give or take, something like that. He said, and so I had commented on his post, and I said those genealogies do not represent the entire human race. And also, those numbers in Genesis are not real numbers. And so I tried to give them a good example about, real numbers and irrational numbers, even though those wouldn't necessarily be the same exact things because those would still be in the base 10 number system. And so what I tried to do is I linked up some information from some different websites, but I also put it in my own words. I paraphrased it. Most important points of the article, so he wouldn't even actually have to click the link. I just linked the articles as a way of citing my sources. So he would know that this was not just coming from me, but this was coming from different scholarly accounts in the field of biblical scholarship. And I think it's very important that we as Christians do this where we look at different interpretations and different takes of the biblical text from experts in the field. So us as Christians, when we go and talk to other people, best apologetic or best interpretation of the scriptures possible. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share my screen and I'm going to go over and gave this young man and a little bit more. So I hold the position that the ages in Genesis are not actual ages, but they are representative of something more. This article I'm about to show you guys, it'll go deeper into the point I just made in more detail. And so, screen, here you go. Here's a nice article from BioLogos. And if you guys ever need any good scholarship or any good resources, BioLogos is a very good website to go to. I give them an A when it comes to biblical scholarship and interpretation and hermeneutics. And so the article starts off and it says, we at BioLogos are often asked how we understand the long lifespans attributed to the Genesis. There is no direct connection between these and the scientific theory of evolution. But I suppose some people think that there is a problem for us since the ages given in the genealogies in chapter 5 and 11 have been used to date the origin of humanity to the relatively recent past, 6 to 10,000 years ago. So you guys know there are Christians, younger Christians, who take those genealogies and they say if you add up all the days, then you get the age of the universe. And of course, our scientific evidence is saying something completely different. Now, though the Bible does not give the age of the earth, that is one interpretation where Christians have used this particular interpretation, raised it over the Bible, raised it over the Word of God, and they make this interpretation equal to the Word of God, to the gospel, to the life, death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus Christ. And most Christians hold younger creationism on the same esteem of that gospel. And so what they say is if you do not accept the interpretation of younger creationism, and that's just not true because that interpretation is wrong. And so going in right here, I just got a text. That was that noise. Going in right here, Genesis 5 is very specific. numbers for the genealogy from Adam to Noah. If these mean what 21st century English speakers naturally take them to mean, we commit to believing either some people live very long lives in the distant past, or that the Bible is reporting incorrect information. But of course, Genesis was not written in 21st century English. So our concern is not with what these words would mean if they were written by us today. Instead, as biblical scholars regularly remind us, we should ask, what do the words mean in the language and culture in which they were written? So we have to do our best not to interpret the Bible in the eyes we would interpret them out to be, but we need to interpret the Bible in the way the ancient Near Eastern Jews would interpret that text out to be. So, in answering this question, the first thing to point out is that in the records we have from ancient Mesopotamian culture, sometimes numbers were used like we use them today as the way of counting and measuring, like feet of cell fields from about 2500 BC. And let me click on this because this is that they're using to support their statement. And so right here on this page right here, let's see, I gotta click on some more stuff. I actually don't have time to get into, but what I should do, I should probably link this into the description box below for you guys when I get done, and then you guys can click on that and find out whatever it is they're trying to show you. Right here it says, but other times in the ancient literature, numbers are used, numerology. Oh, yeah, it says numerologically, that is to say, a number's symbolic value could be used to convey mystical or sacred meaning rather than just its numerical value. If you ever read Potak's The Chosen, you'll remember the kind of numerology, gematria, practiced by Reb Saunders in the Hasidic community. Or you could go to this website today and get an explanation of numerical value. Then it goes on to say different versions of the Sumerian king list are found in several ancient documents, and these use outlandishly large figures for the numbers of years some kings supposedly reigned in various Mesopotamian cities. It says the numbers there came to have a role in legitimizing certain dynasties, and no one thinks they are simply historical reports of true numerical value. So, since there are clear examples of numbers being used and of numbers being used numerologically, when we see some numbers in literature from the ancient Near East, like in Genesis, which is an ancient Near Eastern text, we must consider which way they were being used. So it goes on to say a casual look at the numbers in Genesis 5 seems to suggest a fairly random distribution of ages. Adam lived to be 930, Malahel to 895, Jared to 962, and of course, granddaddy of them all, Methuselah, lived to be 969. We don't immediately notice anything special about these numbers, so we are inclined to see them as consistent with source numbers we expect in reports of ages. But that's because we think of numbers in base 10. If the numbers were reported were all round numbers like 500 or 1,000, that would give us pause and suggest to use the implausibility of all of these people dying at one of their special ages. Taking me to the next article I'm actually about to bring up right now. Actually written by Carol Hill, and she works for ASA. ASA is a foundation that's partnered with BioLogos, and Carol Hill actually is the creator of the worldview approach, which I subscribe to. I'm not a concordance, but also I'm not an accommodationist. I'm both. I take the worldview approach, and I think it's a lot more consistent. Carol Hill does a great job with that approach. But in this article right here, she goes into her spiel about the different ways that we use numbers. And so let me just scroll down. And she's still going into more ways the numbers are being used. Start right here. So she's talking about the Mesopotamian. She said the Mesopotamians were the first to develop writing, astronomy, mathematics, algebra, and geometry, a calendar, and a system of weights and measures, accounting, and money. As the Ubaid period, Mesopotamian architects were familiar with numerous geometric principles such as Genesis 1, 2, 1, 4, 3, 5, 3, 4, 5, and 5, 12, 13. Triangles for laying out buildings. And by 3000 BC, scribes were working with unrealistically large and small numbers. So the Mesopotamians were the first to arrive at logarithms and exponents from their calculations of compound interest. They knew how to solve systems of linear and quadratic equations and two or more unknowns, and they calculated the value of pi to an accuracy of 0.6%. The so-called Pythagorean theorem was invented by the Mesopotamians more than 1,000 years before the lived, and was known not only for special cases but in full generality. So this is going to the base 60 number system. The mathematical texts of the Samaritans or Babylonians, people who lived in southern Mesopotamia, show that these people were regularly using a sexagesimal numbering system, at least by a root time. And she goes on and on and on and on and on. Let me see. I'm going to scroll down. Talking about sacred numbers now. So the Mesopotamians incorporated two concepts of numbers into their worldview. Number one, numbers could have real values, and number two, numbers could be symbolic descriptions of the sacred. Were used in the everyday administrative and economic matters of accounting and commerce, receipts, etc. But certain numbers of let me scroll up. Certain numbers of the sexagesimal systems, such as 60, 600, and 3600, occupy a special place in Babylonian mathematics and astronomy. In religion, the major gods of Mesopotamia were assigned numbers according to their position. Let me say that once again. In religion, the major gods of Mesopotamia were assigned numbers according to their position in the divine hierarchy. For example, Anu, the head of the Mesopotamians pantheon of the gods, assigned 60, the most perfect number in the hierarchy. So 60, being the most perfect number in the hierarchy, was given to Anu for his position of divine hierarchy. So 60 represented divine hierarchy, and they gave 60 to the divine hierarchy, Anu. In addition, Mesopotamians sometimes used numbers cryptographically. Names could have a corresponding numerical value. For example, during the construction of his palace at Kharsubad, Sargon II stated, "I built the circumference of the city wall 16,283 cubits, the number of my name." So 16,283 was numerical or representative of this guy's name. The sacred numbers used by the Mesopotamians gave a type of religious dignity or respect to important persons or to a literary text and fit into their worldview of symmetry, and harmony. So I'm going to keep on going on. Sacred numbers also fit into the Mesopotamians' worldview of symmetry and harmony, which was at the core of their meaning of life. It was important to associate one's life with the right numbers. Important to associate one's life with the right numbers and to avoid wrong numbers that might bring disharmony, kind of like the Chinese concept of yin and yang. Symbolic numbers were of highest value in religious texts because they were considered to be the carriers of ultimate truth and reality. So, going down, and so this is what this is saying right here. Hold on. Let me go up a little bit. Bingo. All right. So I'm going to go up and I'm going to read this paragraph from down. Or let me see. I'm looking for a good place because this is all just really juicy information. I don't want to miss anything. A number of scholars have specifically attempted to mathematically determine a numerical connection between the long time spans in the Sumerian king list and the long ages of the patriarchs and Genesis. But despite these attempts, there still remains no absolute relationship between the two besides a superficial similarity. All right. What has emerged from such comparative studies, however, is that the concept of numbers has changed over time. While the Mesopotamians used a sexagesimal base system, meaning base 60, the Hebrews centuries later were using only a decimal base system. And so, let's see. A possible scenario for this noted change is when Abraham left Mesopotamia for Palestine. He and his descendants came in contact with other Semitic people and the Egyptians who were using the decimal system. Thus, gradually, the decimal system replaced the sexagesimal system in the Hebrews' numerical worldview as they moved from Mesopotamia to Palestine to Egypt. Certainly, Moses, the author of Genesis, would have used the decimal system, having been raised and educated in Egypt. But perhaps some of the numerological elements of the Mesopotamian worldview remained in the Hebrew culture even at the time. It seems certain that a sound and really historical chronology had become established in Israel by the time of David. And it goes on and it says, as 200 or so chronological dates in the books of Samuel, Kings, and Chronicles are, with a few exceptions, of remarkable consistency, but even then, and long after, preferred or figurative numbers continue to be used throughout both the Old and New Testaments. During the Middle Ages, the concept of sacred numbers was lost, and it was not until the discovery and publication of the Babylonian mathematical text of the 20th century that the numerological nature of the patriarchal ages were rediscovered. This change, the conception of numbers, may be the reason for the overall general decrease of patriarchal begetting ages and lifespans over time, from 930 years for Adam down to 175 years to Abraham. The tendency to use exaggerated sacred numbers decreased after the Hebrews left Mesopotamia and slowly acquired a different numerical worldview in Palestine and Egypt. However, in the generally decreasing age trend, there is an enormous jump in the beginning age of Noah, This may signify an attempt by the biblical writer to favor the more righteous, or those who stand out from the rest due to their prominence in the unfolding story. So Noah, the hero of the flood, Nahar, a relatively non-essential person to the story, quickly begets children and quickly leaves the world. His son Terah, however, senses privileged to raise up so eminent a son as Abraham is vouchsafed to rise from the low ebb to which life expectancy has sunk and to live much longer than his fathers. I like what they said here though. They said basically, you see, yeah, they were saying this may signify an attempt by the biblical writer to favor the more righteous or those who stand out. And so those numbers were used probably to distinguish between the more righteous characters, the characters that stand out. They use specific numbers, just like Anu. His number was attributed to 60, the most divine number in their number system. They also, in the same way, were attributing certain numbers to certain people for a specific reason, being they wanted those specific characters of the story to stand out. And they did. And you can see in this chart right here, from the base 60 number system all the way up to the base 10 number system we use today, how the number system changed over time. In Mesopotamia, they were using the sexagesimal system. Then the Egyptians were using the decimal system. Then the Palestinians were using the decimal system. And then during the time of Christ, they were using real numbers. Then in Europe, they were using real numbers only. And then over here, we have the, what is this, the cuneiform tablets found. Oh, so we found these tablets in 2000 AD, and we're starting to understand the concepts of sacred numbers. We discover this here, which is pretty crazy. Here we use the base 10 number system. Down here, they use the base 60 number system, and somewhere along this line. In Middle Ages, right here, we kind of lost the idea of sacred numbers, but we rediscovered them again in 2000 AD. And so this is all kind of like a refreshing to us. This is all kind of new to us. And so when people from this era look at the numbers in this era, we don't understand, because a lot of us don't understand. We have that information from this era all the way up until this era. It was lost. That information was lost at this time, and so we're just now rediscovering. So it makes perfect sense for a 21st century modern to look at the numbers here and say, oh, Adam must have lived until 930 years. But they had a different understanding of numbers because the meaning of numbers have changed over time, just like language. Language has evolved over time. In Charles Darwin's book, he talks about the favorite races, but then in the book he talks about the races of cabbages. A 21st century modern will look at Charles Darwin's book and they say, oh my gosh, the book's his favorite races. But then in the book, he also talks about the races of cabbages. And so language changes over time. The meaning of numbers change over time. And so we have to stop looking at everything from a 21st century way of understanding, and we need to get into the understanding of the ancient Near Eastern Jews. And going down, I like what it says right here. And I think I'll end it around this point. Here we go. So let me see something, because I want to see if we can. There you go. All right, so right here in the parentheses, this is where I want to focus at. So it says from ages end in 0, 5, 7, 2. 5 plus 2 equals 12, or 9. 5 plus 7 equals 19. And a chance probability of 1 in a billion. For the entire 60 number list, antedividual and postdividual, none of the ages end in 1. None of the ages end in 1 or 6. A chance probability of 1/2 million. So remember over here, in this article right here, I said, it said, but that's because we think of numbers in base 10. If the numbers reported were all rounded numbers like 500 or 1000, that would give us pause and suggest to use the implausibility of all these people dying at one of these special ages. The plausibility of all of these people dying at ages that end in 1 or 6. A chance probability of 1 in about 1/2 million. So there actually is a pattern in the Genesis account. So these numbers can't be real numbers. They have to be representative of something more. Surely, if the ages of the random patriarchs in Genesis are random numbers, as we would expect for real ages, this could not be the case. It is inconceivable. And they go on and they make my point. So going on, it says, whatever the specific intent of the biblical writer for each of these patriarchal ages, it does seem apparent. Go up. The purpose of the text was to preserve the harmony of numbers. Further evidence that the patriarchal ages in Genesis are not real numbers is the overlap of the patriarchs' lifespans. If the genealogies in Genesis 5 and 11 are both literal and complete, then the death of Adam has to be dated to the generation of Noah's fathers, Lamech, Shem, Arphaxad, Shelah, Eber, would have outlived all of the generations following as far as including Terah, the contemporary of Abraham, for 58 years, and Shem, Noah's son, would have survived Abraham by 35 years. But where does the Bible indicate that any of these men were coeval? They're spoken of as respected ancestors, not as contemporaries that interacted with them or who were to be cared for in their old ages. Going on. We'll keep on going down. So this is the ages of the patriarchs corresponding with the sexagesimal and preferred numbers. So this is the age years when the first son was born. Here's the sexagesimal and preferred numbers right here, 60 times 2. Remaining years of his life, sexagesimal and preferred numbers, the total years, sexagesimal and preferred numbers. It says all age numbers 30 and all from Adam to Noah are a combination of sacred numbers, years and months. 7. No numbers end in 1, 3, 4, 6, or 8. A chance probability of 1 in a billion. 13 numbers end in 0, some multiple combination of 60. 8 numbers end in 5, just that in third. The Mesopotamians were using sacred numbers, not real numbers. Therefore, these numbers were not meant to be and should not be interpreted as real numbers, like I just said. Keep on going down. And another text. I didn't want to read this whole thing. We would have been here for years. All right, let me read this part right here. The correlation of Genesis chronologies with real time. If patriarchal ages are considered to be literal and complete, then one can approximate the length of time back to Adam. Archaeological and geologic evidence places Abraham at 2000 BC. If 2000 years added to a total of 2046 years from Adam to Abraham. Measure the text in those days added to about 4000 BC or 6000 years before the present. And one also assumed that the days in Genesis 1 are literal 24-hour days. The creation year from the universe is about 6,000 years, a basic tenet of creation. This date of 6,000 contradict the astronomical evidence and geological evidence. It also does not fit with archaeological evidence from Near East. It is known that Egyptian and Babylonian civilizations were highly developed before 4000 BC. Ubaid culture, the first civilization that has been discovered in Mesopotamia, is old as 5500 BC. However, if there are missing links or gaps in these genealogies, as has been discussed above, perhaps these dates can be pushed back further in time. Let me see. I'm just gonna keep on going. All right, now conclusion. That's what I want to reach. Oh my goodness, conclusion. Thank you. All right. The fact that numbers in Genesis may have been contrived or intentional rather than real is difficult for many people to accept. Does this compromise the integrity of the Bible? I mean that the Bible cannot be trusted. Does it mean that it cannot be taken literally? No, it means only the text must be approached from the culture of the people who wrote it. We have to try and get into the mind of these ancient people, understand what made them tick. Just like modern missionaries must try and understand the worldview of the people they're trying to evangelize. In the case of Genesis, we understand the text from the worldview of the ancient Near East of 2000 BC, not from the worldview of the early 1600s, King James, Europe, or the scientific worldview of the 20th century. People of the ancient Near East simply did not think along the same lines or express themselves in the same manner as the European races. Question to ask is Genesis and the record of the patriarch from Adam to Abraham to be considered mythological or historical? Ironically, by interpreting the numbers of Genesis literally, Christians have created a mythological world that does not fit with the historical or scientific record. Ironically, by interpreting the numbers of Genesis literally as real numbers, Christians have created a mythological world that does not fit with the historical or scientific record, or as Hires aptly put it, unwittingly, literal or concordant views are secular rather than sacred interpretations of the text. The literal or numerical view is secular, while the symbolic or numerological view is sacred, because that is how the original biblical authors intended for it to be. To faithfully interpret Genesis is to be faithful to what it really means as it was written, not to what people living in a later age assume or desire it to be. It is also ironic that the mythological world created by many well-intentioned and serious literal Christians partially on the numbers in Genesis has caused millions of people, this has caused millions of people to reject the Bible and the truths contained therein. And that is how the article. And so basically, that's a wrap, and that just totally demolishes and it completely destroys the younger creation view that These genealogies are real numbers. They're literal genealogy. They're literal numbers. And that they are the record of either all of humanity or a record of the entire world. It's not true. And it's not true because the scientific evidence or anything else says so, but it's true because that's what the biblical authors did not intend. The biblical authors did not intend for us to interpret the Bible the way we do. And the evidence shows it. Now, what I want to do is I want to bring General in here one of these days, and I want to sit down with him and dissect the genealogies and get the actual ages, them all the way, down to Abraham or to the last person in genealogy, so we can find out, hey, this is how old Adam actually was. And then I also want to start talking about the flood and how big was the ark and stuff like that. But just remember from what we just researched and read and everything, when we look at the Genesis account from a Mesopotamian, ancient Near Eastern perspective, they had a different number system than we had today. Numbers change over time, languages change over time. We use a base 10 number system. They use the base 60. And so, of course, if we have this in mind, the dimensions of the ark would be a lot different of what we think the ark would be today if we take those numbers in mindset. We take the genealogies of the Bible. So until next time, good luck, good night, and study to show yourself approved. Because what you teach somebody today might influence how millions of people see the Bible tomorrow.